No, it'll be about an hour.
Okay, folks. I'd like to open up our last flight of bills this afternoon, and I would sincerely like to thank folks that have been with us here through the day and really allowing us to manage 13 public hearings in one day. It's quite a lot to do. We are in the last flight with LD1214 and LD800. We will just take actually LD1214 in its entirety. We'll break a little bit with the way we've done things in the past, as I'm the presenter for LD800, so we will do LD1214, both proponents, opponents, and neither for nor against, sort of the traditional way, taking exception to the way we've done things already today. LD1214 is an act to allow a referendum regarding school choice within Regional School Unit Number 12, and I see the bill sponsor, Representative McDonald, is joining us once again today.
Thank you, Senator Langley, Chair Langley, and other esteemed members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. Yeah, you have done a great job today, and I must say it's interesting to be in a committee where everybody who's testifying here is an ordinary person. I mean, you know, they're not paid lobbyists. They're just people from the state of Maine who have an interest in things, and you don't always see that, but it was really great to sit there and
it's refreshing today
and hear all of their testimony for and against. I know there's differences, so I know you'll work on them and resolve them. And I do commend you on your patience, although I will note that you've really you've drifted into my ordinary nap time here, but anyway, I'll try to do my best. This bill that I have before you is a pretty straightforward and simple bill. As you read it, you're going to see a couple of drafting errors, so if you would just listen to me rather than take a look at it, I can briefly tell you what the intention of the bill is. The intention of the bill is to allow the towns of Alna and Westport Island, which are two towns within the RSU 12, to each on their own have a vote on whether or not to allow to continue K through 8 choice from their two towns within the district. The way the bill is drafted, it says that the whole RSU would vote on that, but that is not the intention. The intention is to have just the two towns take votes separately, and the vote could actually come out different ways in the two towns. My understanding is that the K through 8 piece of it, that choice that got inherited into this RSU, is a rarity in Maine, and that I think only Long Island is the other community in the whole state that has K through 8 choice outside of the district. I will let others behind me clarify that, and I am not an expert in this. I will also note that I indicated when I put this bill in, as you'll see on the front of it, that it says by request, and usually that's code word for I'm putting it in, but I don't agree with it. That's not true in this case, although when I first put it in I wasn't sure. But as I've talked with the proponents of this bill and listened to their arguments, I think there's a good case to be made that the state should allow these two communities the opportunity to take a vote. It does not mandate that they take a vote. It only allows the communities the opportunity to take a vote on whether they want to continue with the K through 8 choice portion only. As it was presented to me, it's costing these two towns a considerable amount of money to allow this to continue. The bill, and so it's that drives it. It's an economic issue, I think. The bill, though, in fairness to the people of these two towns, would exempt from any vote that's taken either people that are already in a K through 8 choice situation outside of the district, or any siblings of people who are already in a K through 8 choice, and in fact, any child who is even of preschool age, who at the time of this referendum, if it's taken, in a family that wants to make choice, they can make that choice. There are families in these towns that have come into the towns wanting to, thinking that they had this choice, and this would not extinguish that choice for them, but only going forward from the date, anyone who's born from the date of this referendum going forward would not have choice, K through 8 choice outside of the district. So it's an unusual situation. I ask you to listen to those who come after me to to explain it further, and as a representative of the folks from Westport Island, this is also slightly unusual because the RSU curves up towards Augusta, and it does include towns with other representatives, and I believe Representative Fossil is here also to testify on this. So, but I am the representative of the people of Westport Island, and in that vein, I have brought this forward for your consideration. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them, but there are others behind me who have worked with this issue for quite a while within their towns.
Thank you, Representative McDonald. Representative Lovejoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you.
This is about school choice. We heard earlier from some of the folks from Wiscasset that they're the only ones in their RSU that don't have school choice. Is this something that should be extended to all? And if that were to happen, does it disintegrate the entire RSU?
That's not my intention in putting this forward. My intention was to narrowly focus it to what my constituents asked me. I mean, the committee will have this bill, and you'll be able to make wise decisions based upon everything you've heard. But my focus is on K through 8. That's the choice element that we're talking about in the towns of Alna and Westport Island. That's what this would address.
I'm just looking at it from the RSU as a whole in the issue of choice. But
right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Representative McDonald? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They don't have to vote the same way.
No, that's correct. This could be separate. One town could say, I'm fine with this, let it continue on.
Okay,
another could say, we're not.
Thank you for your testimony.
I have revised the amendments, made the amendments that would make this. I've talked with Dr. Phil already, and I will be giving him a copy of the changes that would need to be made to reflect what I just told you. The bill has a drafting error in it that doesn't reflect the situation as we want it to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing there was only one sponsor on the bill, we will go to proponents of the bill. Looks like Richard DeVries is first.
Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, distinguished members of this committee, I'm still Richard DeVries. I'm still representing myself. I will be very brief. The cost of education within an RSU is heavily impacted by the cost of tuitioning students out of the district when there is sufficient capacity within the district to easily accommodate such students. For the 2011-2012 school year, that cost is approximately $482,000. The cost for assimilating the approximately 60 students into the RSU 12 system would be approximately $10,000 in total. LD1214 only authorizes the residents of Westport Island and Alna to hold a referendum to vote on whether or not K through 8 schools choice should continue to be provided for students of new parents entering RSU 12. Superintendent Potter is striving to provide equity across the RSU 12 system, and this bill would support that effort. In answer to your question, Representative Lovejoy, we currently have 9 through 12 choice for all of the towns in the RSU except Wiscasset. The only towns that have K through 8 is Westport Island and Alna. So that is, the current situation. There is still that inequity of 9 through 12 for Wiscasset, which personally I think should be fixed, but I'm not from Wiscasset, so I won't be putting that forward, but that would be where I'd be coming from. Is there any questions on my testimony?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate that very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
I would also like to just summarize Mr. Noltz.
He just left that with you?
Yes. He is basically, saying a lot of the things I have said, but the things he has said is, Alna and Westport Island have school choice. The remaining RSU towns do not have that option, and it is an expense borne by those parents in those towns. LD1214 only asks that voters in Alna and Westport Island be allowed to express their opinion on the matter of school choice. Their views deserve to be heard and considered. Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Looks like Doug Baston and David Abbott.
Senator Langley, we have a mom who needs to meet a school bus here. Could we allow her to come up and then I'll take her?
And is that Mary?
Kim Anderson.
Kim Anderson. All right, Kim. You understand about the school bus.
I actually missed the bus, but I've got a neighbor who's going to need me to pick up my son, so. Yeah. So before I start, I just want to apologize that I'm going to make my testimony and then leave. So I apologize. Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. I'm Kim Anderson, a resident of Wiscasset and a member of the RSU 12 Board of Directors, and I'm on the RSU 12 Finance Committee. This testimony is provided in support of LD 1214, an act to allow a referendum regarding school choice within Regional School Unit Number 12. I am offering this testimony as a private citizen. My testimony does not represent the adopted position of the RSU 12 Board of Directors or the RSU 12 Finance Committee. It is budget time, and like budget committees all over the state and the nation, RSU 12 Finance Committee is making difficult choices. We need to make cuts. Big cuts in our budget will enable us to provide a flat 2012 budget. But if we want to provide our taxpayers with a flat total local contribution for education, then we need to make huge cuts in our budget. This is in part due to the reduction in our state subsidy for education. Over the past 3 years, RSU 12 has had its state subsidy reduced by close to 22%, which is almost $4 million. We've cut system administration by over 25%. We've reduced school supplies to $100 per child per year for everything. That includes science supplies, art supplies, school books, workbooks, paper, pens, crayons, everything. We've cut our ed techs, we've cut teachers, we've eliminated a bus route, we've eliminated drivers, custodians, and still, with all these cuts, we are able to make do, thanks to creative administrators, talented teachers, amazing kids, and very supportive communities. We work very hard to make our cuts across this district equitably, but not everyone feels the force of these cuts equally, or even at all. We have to pay tuition for our choice students in full before we can start looking for other areas to reduce in our budget. The children in our district must absorb 100% of the budget cuts on their own, while the children in Westport Island and Alna, and the secondary school children everywhere except Wiscasset, can have tuition paid in full to any school of their choice. Many of us today do not have a choice except to tighten our belts and make the best of the situation. But some of us have the choice to access taxpayer funds from throughout the RSU to pay their children's tuition out of district. A choice for choice is what our neighbors in Alna and Westport Island have come here today to request of you. The majority of those citizens could choose to stop what is an inequitable situation if you will allow them the opportunity to have their voice heard. And I hope that you do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any questions from Ms. Anderson? You're free to catch the bus.
Nervous.
Nicely done. We will, next on our list is, looks like Doug Baston and then David Abbott.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience today. We have been out here while you've been sitting. We've had 2 childbirths and a birthday. I don't know.
Rotated the tires and changed the oil.
Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education. My name is Doug Baston, and I'm a resident of the town of Alna. We are before you today with a cautionary tale of an unintended consequence of the consolidation law and the problems it has created between the towns in RSU 12 and amongst our own citizens. This is not a dispute about school choice. It is an example of what can happen if school choice is implemented without considering all the ramifications. Until 2000, Alna and Westport contracted exclusively with Wiscasset for our education. Think of it this way. Wiscasset owned the airplane and we all agreed to fly with them exclusively. In 2000, we asked Wiscasset for seats on their school board so we would have some say in how our tuition dollars were spent. Wiscasset denied this, but instead offered us a non-exclusive contract. They would accept our children, but we could also send them elsewhere. This was sort of a peace offering and nothing more. Now we could buy tickets on other airlines. Our school committees accepted this contract, but because there was no cost to us, they saw no reason to put it to a town vote. Alna citizens never voted to have choice. Under consolidation, 8 towns formed, or some would say forced to form, RSU 12. Now we all share ownership of an airplane, and the cost of educating Alna and Westport children became the shared responsibility of all 8 towns. But here's the rub. Only Alna and Westport have K throughout choice, but every other town has to pay for it. So what's happened? Well, our common airplane has empty seats, so filling seat 90 on a 100-seat airplane adds virtually nothing to the cost of the flight, as you have heard. It's like a discount ticket, so the plane's owners are struggling to reduce flight costs and maintain a good flight experience for all the passengers, most of whom have to fly with us, and at the same time they're obliged to buy tickets for some passengers to fly on other airplanes, and they're full-price tickets. No one intended this. True, our choice contract was carried into consolidation, but no one knew or could have known what the implications would be. In truth, we voted for consolidation, like many towns you've heard before us today, because we were afraid of the penalties. And we were afraid that if we didn't partner up, with the big guys, we'd be the last ones standing when the music stopped. Choice was a non-issue in our vote. Some may tell you that this vote constituted an informed vote in favor of choice, and more than that we should be bound by it forever. But Alna and Westport did not vote to beggar our neighbors, nor to tax ourselves more to pay for choice, and we certainly had no idea that our decision would be binding for an eternity. Last month we sent a survey to every Alna taxpayer, and it's attached to the testimony, and we asked them if they wanted this legislature to grant them the right to revisit this issue, for the right to vote to have an informed choice on choice. And by a 2-to-1 margin they said yes, and on Westport Island the margin was even greater, I believe 8-to-1. This is not about school choice. It's about the right to vote on choice. We are asking you to grant us that right at the local level because we have no other remedy to address this inequity. If you here can craft a solution that keeps school choice but distributes both the benefits and the burdens fairly, none of us in any of our towns would object. But the current situation cannot be allowed to stand. It has created 2 classes of taxpayers and 2 classes of students, those who are favored with choice and those who are not, but who must pay for it. That is fundamentally not right, and the sense of grievance between towns and citizens can only grow as more and more people flock to our little towns to avail themselves of our unique and subsidized choice. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Baston. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next on our list, David Abbott, followed by Mary McPherson.
Good afternoon. Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is David Abbott. I'm the first selectman in the town of Alna. I'm here today to speak in support of the town of Alna having a referendum vote within the town to decide whether or not to continue school choice for all of the students who are in grades K through 8. As it stands at this time, the town of Alna has school choice for these students, but has no say as to whether or not to continue with that choice. And we're being told it will stay that way forever. I'm not here to debate the benefits or disadvantages of school choice, because I don't think that's the issue before us today. I'm sure these issues will be debated at length if the bill passes and a referendum vote is held. I'm only here to support the right of the town of Alna to make the decision whether or not to continue with that school choice.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Any questions for Mr. Abbott? Thank you for your testimony today. Oh, Representative Nelson, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you clarify for me, I am reading on the attachment that it says it requires that the RSU pay tuition costs for any family that decides to send their K through 8 children to a private school or a public school outside the RSU. Can you describe to me how that tuition choice with public dollars goes to a private school?
I think it has to be a state-funded private school, but I'm not sure about that. But it's like we do have kids go to the Montessori school, which I think is a private school, but we only have to pay, I believe, the maximum allowed tuition that the state makes us pay, but maybe Rich, you can clarify.
It's got to be on the approved list of private schools, and then the maximum that is paid to that private school is the state average for EPS.
Thank you.
Representative Rankin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you are in an RSU. Now, what you're trying to do is decide which high school these students should go to?
No, just K through 8.
Oh, K through 8?
Yes.
They go to a private school for K through 8?
Yep.
I'm glad I asked. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on our list is Mary McPherson, followed by Stephen Sheehy. Hi.
Good afternoon. Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, members of the committee, my name is Mary McPherson, and I live in Alna. In this room, we have divergent opinions on school choice. Some oppose it, some support it within the within the public school system, and some believe that there should be choice for both private and public schools. Creating a statewide policy on this issue will be complex, challenging, and time-consuming, but fortunately the issue here is far simpler and should not have implications for the larger conversation that you're going to have on choice. Alna and Westport are the exception, not the rule, across the state. About 1,300 K through 8 students attend school within our 8-town RSU. 33 of these students are from Alna, 48 are from Westport, so together they comprise about 5% of the total RSU attendees. This year, 49 K through 8 children in Alna and 11 K through 8 children in Westport attend school out of RSU. This represents 60% of the K through 8 children in Alna and 19% of them in Westport. Because of our current RSU agreement, these students have their tuition paid by the RSU up to the state average, whether they're going to a public or approved private school. According to RSU 12 Superintendent Greg Potter, the total cost of sending these 60 students, K through 8, to school is $449,000. Who pays the tuition cost for these 60 students from 2 towns? The taxpayers of the 8 towns in the RSU. The cost is allocated according to the RSU cost share formula. Westport pays 8.48% of the cost. Alna pays 6.24% of the cost. The other 85% of the cost is borne by the other 6 states that do not have choice for K through 8. I've attached a chart to my testimony, which is on the second page, based on information from RSU 12 Superintendent Potter and the RSU 12 website that provides a breakdown of the out-of-RSU tuition cost per town in the RSU. So I used the cost formula, took the full amount of money, and it shows how much money each of the towns is responsible for paying in taxes to support the out-of-RSU tuition costs. Some may argue that having these children from Alna and Westport tuitioned out is a net gain for the RSU, since out-of-RSU tuition cost is about half the cost per pupil at both Wiscasset Primary and Wiscasset Middle School. Superintendent Potter has informed us that the additional cost of the RSU, if these 60 students all attended the primary and middle schools in Wiscasset, would be very little, as the present schools are underutilized. This makes good sense intuitively. Nearly all the costs in these schools are fixed, with the bulk of the cost for overhead and personnel. And since these schools are currently underpopulated, additional classrooms and teachers would not be required to support an additional 60 students because they'd be spread out through K through 8. So rather than spending $15,250 more per pupil in Wiscasset, which is the full average pupil cost at the current time, the savings would in fact be most of the $7,500 tuition cost that the RSU is currently paying out for our 60 kids who are going out of RSU. In closing, I'd like to affirm two things. First, this bill only addresses the issue of K through 8. Most of the towns in our RSU, in fact, I think all of them except Wiscasset, have a long tradition going back over half a century of choice in high school attendance. No one wants to change that. Second, we recognize that the Alna and Westport K through 8 kids currently enrolled out of RSU, as well as their younger siblings, and as Representative McDonald mentioned, also any other young children who are currently living in Alna and will be going to school, children who have lived in Alna at the time that a vote is taken, all of those students would be allowed to continue to attend the school they have chosen. Their education would not be disrupted. By supporting this legislation, you will simply be providing the citizens of Alna and Westport with the right to choose whether we wish to change the policy at this time or in the future. The current system is unfair, and we ask for the opportunity to work together to find a solution that will be more equitable for all RSU students, parents, and taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, members of the committee. If you folks decided to propose a bill that every K through 8 child in Maine would have the option of going to any school their parents wanted them to go to, that would generate a substantial amount of attention, I suspect. It would generate a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, a lot of editorials, and it would require a detailed legislative process. And that's really the way policy should be set. What we have here is policy set kind of by accident. The people of Alna didn't vote for this policy. The people of Westport Island didn't vote for this policy. And the other 6 towns, the people of those 6 towns didn't vote for this policy. But here we have what seems on its face to be unfair. Objectively unfair. If I live in Alna, I can send my child to the Montessori school. Doesn't cost me anything. What's wrong with that? If I live in Westport, I can send my child to the local private school or one of the other local public schools, should I choose. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem is if I live in Wiscasset or if I live in Chelsea, I don't have that option. And it seems kind of fundamentally unfair for some people to have that right and some people to not have that right. If it's a good policy, and I don't really know whether it is or not, but if it's a good policy, it ought to apply to everybody, not just to a select few who kind of accidentally backed into it. Nobody ever voted for this system, and the way to deal with it, I think, is to at the very least allow the people of Alna and Westport to vote for it, or not. When I was a public school teacher, one of the things that was true then and I think is still true now, even though that was 30-some-odd years ago, is that schools are better when people have a vested interest in them. And the concern I have is that if we disassociate the taxpayers and the parents on the one hand with their schools on the other, we run the risk that people will no longer have as strong an interest in their local communities and in their local community schools. And so one of the concerns I have is that if my kids aren't going to the local schools, am I as likely to vote for that school budget when the time comes? Or am I likely to say, well, it's not going to make any difference to my kids. They don't go to the local school. They go to the other schools. So I think that there's a risk we all run And as I said in my prepared remarks, we kind of hope that the better angels of our nature will prevail and that we'll rise above petty personal financial considerations. And maybe we will. And I hope that we will. But we run the risk that we won't. This is a lot of money that could be used to pay for teachers and to pay for other essential services. And I suggest to you that at the very least we ought to have an opportunity to discuss this in our little towns. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehy. And Representative Wagner, you have a question.
Yes, and I believe you did not state your name.
I'm sorry, it's Stephen Sheehy.
Thank you. What is the incentive for, if Alna students are getting this great opportunity, this great advantage of being able to choose their schools and have the entire RSU pay for it, what's the incentive for Alna people to vote against or vote school choice out?
Well, Representative Wagner, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, it's just unfair. Well, what flows from that? What flows from that is that there are other unfairness, other aspects of the school funding formulas, for example, that we in Alna may perceive as unfair. It's pretty hard for us to sit down with the folks from Chelsea and say, you know, we think we're paying a disproportionate amount of the total freight here, and have them say, well, yeah, but your kids aren't even in the schools. 60% of your kids are going to some other school, so it's very hard to make that argument. I mean, we're either all in this boat together or we're not, and I think that one of the reasons that I think at least a vote on this is a good idea is because we need to sort of cast our lot with RSU 12 or not, and this sort of splits people in half, and I just don't think it's good in terms of the way we all approach this in a democracy to have sort of a half a vested interest in schools and not otherwise. I'm a real believer in public schools, and I think that having this kind of choice tends to undermine it.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sure you realize that choice once given up is awfully hard to get back.
Sure. And I do recognize that, but we never really asked for it in the first place. We've just kind of always had it. Well, yeah, we are. In some respects, although keep in mind, and this gets back to Representative Wagner's question as well, we do pay extra for it. Our proportion of the extra cost may be small, but we do pay extra for it, and that overall $480,000 goes to benefit the entire schools as a unit, and one would hope that having the money available for that entire unit would also accrue to the benefit of all the people.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the work session, it would be helpful for me to know how many of the children who choose choice from Alna and Westport actually leave the RSU to go to school, and how many of those, because I assume there are K-8 schools in the RSU, just not in Alna and Westport. Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
Yes, there are several.
Right. And so I would also be interested to know how many of the students who elect choice don't go to one of the public schools that are available in the district.
To my knowledge, none of the kids in the RSU who live in Alna go to the other RSU elementary schools, that are way out, like in Chelsea, for example. So 60% of the kids who go to, 60% of the K-8 kids in Alna go to out of RSU 12 elementary schools. Some of them go to private schools, some of them go to public schools. So more of our kids are not in RSU 12 schools than are in RSU 12 schools.
If you could have those numbers for the work session, it would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that concludes the proponent side of our testimonies today, and now we would like to start with the opponents. And it looks like Jonathan, I can't read the read the last name. Villeneuve. Okay.
Oh,
hang on just a second. Representative Fossil, I didn't see your name here, so if you would, thank you.
I've been bouncing between here and appropriations. I first give you the update on appropriations. Sit down, relax, take a nap. It's nicer in here than it is over there. Believe me, why do you think I'm here? Okay. Yeah. Senate Chair Langley, House Chair Richardson, and esteemed members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs, I stand before you to strongly oppose LD1214, an act to allow a referendum regarding school choice within Regional School District Number 12. This is an issue of local control as much as it is an issue of school choice. This proposal was not requested by the Alna Selectmen. Their letter opposing it is attached. Not requested by Alna School Board members. Not requested by Alna voters. They voted in school choice that specifically allowed us K through 12 choice. Not requested by Alna parents, 60% of whom tuition their children out of the RSU schools. Some of those schools are within geographical boundaries of the district, but they're all either, the ones within the district boundaries are private schools. There's a couple of public schools outside, particularly Great Salt Bay. And it's obviously not requested by Alna's House District 53 representative, who strongly opposes it. And it's never been the subject of any public meeting or public discussion in Alna. This idea is from one of Alna's residents who had a small group of people in his supporting committee. This is a flawed bill that, among other things, called for a district-wide referendum vote. They couldn't go back on this one because they'd already revised it once, and it requires all of Alna students to attend only the RSU 12 schools in Wiscasset. The committee that is responsible for this flawed mailing to all of Alna residents claims school choice costs the Alna taxpayers $26,000 extra each year. If you think that's the case, I refer you to Attachment 1 that shows you the costs in the Wiscasset Primary School, the Wiscasset Middle School, the Wiscasset High School, compares that to the cost of tuitioning students. In each case, it's much less cost to tuition students. And yet the postcard said this cost all Alna taxpayers at least $26,000 in extra taxes each year. If such a postcard were mailed as part of an election campaign, it would likely violate Maine's election laws since it amounts to an illegal push poll. And again, there's the attachment, and the small attachment you see stapled is the business side of the postcard you were supposed to return. In fact, the cost of tuitioning Alna students is much less than the cost of educating within the RSU. For primary school students, it's $8,080 less. For middle school students, it's $7,294 less. And for the high school students, it's $13,392 less. If Alna were not in the RSU and allowed to tuition all of its students, as we have in the past, the savings to Alna taxpayers would be enormous. Thank you for your attention. I urge you to vote ought not to pass. Being a former school board member, through much of this period, I can go just into as much detail on this as you'd like. And I look forward to attending the work session. And I entertain any and all questions.
Thank you, Representative Fossil, for your testimony. Any questions for the good representative? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll continue on with our testimony in opposition. Jonathan?
Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, and members of the committee. My name is Jonathan Villeneuve, and I strongly oppose this bill, first in my capacity as second selectman of the town of Alna. On March 31st, all three members of the Alna Board of Selectmen unanimously voted to oppose certain language of this bill. We mailed a letter in opposition to each of you. I have attached it to my written testimony for your review. I have heard recently that the aspects we opposed are to be amended out. Even so, I would like to reiterate the sentiment of our select board by saying we cannot and will not support any legislation that allows voters in Alna that allows voters in other towns outside of Alna to choose whether or not the students of Alna keep or lose school choice. For the rest of my time, I speak only for myself as a private citizen of Alna who strongly opposes this bill and not as the second selectman. In full disclosure, our family exercises school choice and sends our oldest daughter to a school outside of the RSU. We love how our daughter is thriving in her school and are grateful to be able to choose the school that works best for us. I now wish to draw attention to what I feel is a Trojan horse justification for this legislation. One reason given by the supporters of this bill in their mailings is that K-8 choice costs the taxpayers of Alna $25,000 per year. Please note that this figure does not take into account the over $10 million state subsidy given to the RSU before costs are passed on to the towns. Why does this bill not address the financial burden of high school choice? If it was about financial figures, 7 out of 8 towns in the RSU have high school choice, and the RSU pays out tuition bills totaling $3.8 million per year for these students. Using unsubsidized math from the state, Alna's share of this is about $240,000 a year. That means each year we pay almost $250,000 million for the high school school choice tuition of the other towns in the RSU. This is 10 times more than the K-8 tuition bills are costing us. Why don't we amend the bill to allow for the elimination of high school choice RSU-wide? While we're at it, my taxes help pay for the state portion of all the schools statewide who may have school choice. Why don't we amend the bill to allow for elimination of all school choice across the state of Maine? This would truly save Alna residents more money. I obviously state these facts with a lot of tongue-in-cheek and a little sarcasm, and I apologize, but it's to illustrate my point that the purpose of this bill is clearly not about saving money. I believe the real purpose of this bill is to overturn the fully informed 2008 majority referendum vote of Alna to join RSU 12 with K-12 school choice continuing in perpetuity. I also believe the real purpose of this bill is to force the Alna K-8 children who attend elsewhere into the extremely underutilized and exorbitantly expensively run Wiscasset schools. Thank you for your service and your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Villanova. Any questions? Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm confused. I have a letter here, which is signed by 3. Dave Abbott, first selectman, you as second selectman, and Dave Brangart, third selectman, and I have your testimony in opposition.
Yes.
I also have testimony from Dave Abbott
Yes.
in support. Can
Right.
you explain to me how I've got the same letter with 2 people on the other side?
I can. On the March 31st meeting, we took the wording of the bill from the website that we were given, which I believe has the clerical errors that Representative McDonald talks about. And in that bill, as we saw it, it had every single town in the RSU holding a referendum by force by a certain date in 2012 to decide whether Alna gets to keep its school choice or not. And if you look at the wording of the letter, the select board was able to agree on very narrowly worded things that language is what we cannot support. I believe, I don't want to speak for First Selectman Abbott, but because he was told that Representative McDonald was going to amend it to just make it an Alna choice on choice, I believe personally he then would be on the pro side of this. I think that hopefully explains it. Okay. I apologize for that confusion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here and waiting as long as you have. You mentioned about the underutilized Wiscasset schools. And having heard from other folks in that district over the last 2.5 years, one of the reasons they cite for it being underutilized is everyone has school choice except for Wiscasset.
Right.
So are we in a position where either way somebody gets hurt?
I'm not sure if we're in that position. I believe the way I look at this is that at least when we voted to join the RSU back in 2008, Alna tuitioned all its children out. And some chose, in fact, K through 8, it was maybe somewhere between 40 and 50% to go through Wiscasset schools, and the rest of the parents in town, and that number continues to grow, chose to go to Great Salt Bay, Damascotta Montessori School, Center for Teaching and Learning. We even have a student that tuitions to the Bath School District. So when we voted to join the school RSU in 2008, we were told that we would keep school choice in perpetuity as part of that agreement. I believe it's part of the RSU state law. And it was something that our school board representatives had put as something important to the town of Alna in the leading up votes. So in Wiscasset, I believe, voted before they joined. They had a vote before the town on whether they were going to close one of their 3 schools because of the underutilization, and the town chose to keep it open for whatever reason. So I don't know. I'm not sure if the problem truly is Alna's choice kids is the reason why Wiscasset's per pupil cost is $15,000 a year.
And I certainly am not saying it's just Alna by any chance. I just have heard that everyone in the whole RSU other than Wiscasset has school choice, which does complicate the issue.
Right. I think, again, those other towns had 9 through 12 school choice when they joined the RSU, and part of the law in that RSU was that you would then keep it, and I think that's probably what's happening.
Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Looking for Jeff Philbrook and then Rebecca Tilden.
Thank you. Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Philbrook. I live in Alna with my wife Karen, and I have 2 daughters, Allison, who's 2 years old, and Mary, who's 3 months old. As this bill is written, many families like ours are specifically discriminated against because we have young children not yet in the school system and could lose our option of school choice. Now, what I've heard today is there may be a new version with some new wording that changes that. I'm a firm believer of once I see it in writing, I'll believe it. So I'm speaking to the fact that I haven't seen it, so I don't necessarily believe it. So some of my comments will sort of reference that. I strongly oppose the legislation proposed for the following reasons. I personally believe that parents know the educational needs of their children best, and parents can best decide what school their children will succeed and thrive in, not an external body such as an RSU. As mentioned, this act would allow for discrimination against certain families, whether they are existing long-time residents of Alna or Westport, with children not yet in the school system like ours, or future residents. They and future generations lose out, which I think is wrong. All RSU, and this point has been mentioned, I agree with it, all RSU 12 towns already voted to retain school choice when we voted to join the RSU. I specifically was sitting at one of the hearings where I asked Superintendent Potter, if I decide to vote to become a member of the RSU, is school choice retained as a part of that? And the answer was yes. I voted to join RSU 12 knowing that school choice would be part of that. I do not believe that discriminatory legislation mandating attendance in a specific town school, such as Wiscasset, is right, especially in small rural towns like Alna and Westport that have no schools of our own, but have many excellent choices nearby. This legislation and a subsequent referendum would punish parents who wish to exercise choice with a financial club, I believe. The reality is going to be that losing school choice will force nearly all K through 8 children in Alna and Westport into RSU schools, because very few families, if any, can afford to pay for schooling twice in the form of property taxes and tuition for an external school. Likewise, very few families can afford to quit a job to homeschool. Charging parents twice for exercising school choice is wrong. Some say the RSU 12, and there's been comments on this, some say the RSU 12 has capacity and quality problems. The quick fix this legislation suggests to apply is to increase enrollment by forcing new families to attend their underutilized schools. This would only offer a Band-Aid to a bigger problem at the expense of our children's education for those who wish to exercise choice. The right thing to do is to face the harder issues in the RSU of right-sizing, expense reduction, and quality improvement. It is my opinion that the model in Alna and Westport for school choice should be expanded, not eliminated, because it promotes competition, which drives efficiency, innovation, and quality improvement throughout the system. Regardless of location, if a school finds itself adding 50% more out-of-district students, it should be rewarded with significantly more tuition dollars that follow the students out of the district. This incentive funding works with school choice. It does not work in a monopoly without school choice. And I'll leave you with two last comments. You know, is the message that we want to send is the message that proponents of this legislation want to send to young families is, we don't want you moving to Alna. We don't want new families here. Alna and Westport's future, in part, depends on attracting young families, which school choice does. And I'll just leave you with one final quote that I read recently that I really like, which is that children are less than 1/3 of our population and all of our future. Please do not allow this act to proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Philbrick. Any questions for Mr. Philbrick? Representative Nelson.
Thank you. Good day. Good afternoon, I guess. If this bill were just to allow the citizens of Alna and Westport to vote on whether they wanted to continue choice, and that vote, would you support the bill? And take the consequences of that vote of your communities?
I don't support it on philosophical grounds because I believe that as part of joining the RSU, this question was already asked, and there was a referendum on it, and the voting populace, the citizens, voted, and so we made our choice. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Philbrick, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next is Rebecca Tilden.
Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, and members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Tilden. I am a parent from Alna, and I'm here to oppose LD1214. I have to admit that my starting point in thinking about Alna's school choice was that choice is a luxury to be enjoyed while it lasted. My thinking has evolved dramatically, especially as I put a lot of thought into why school choice should be maintained for towns like Alna, Maine. For me, the most persuasive argument is that as a small town, sparsely populated relative to the surrounding towns, Alna residents have minimal representation when it comes to decisions made regarding our schools. We do not have our own school, therefore we must send our students to other town schools. We are fortunate to have good options, but where we are unlucky is that we have little to no say in important decisions made both within school committee meetings and public votes. As a parent, my best defense or strategy is to choose a school system that best suits the educational and academic values I have. The option of choice is probably the fairest option to towns like Alna and Westport Island that are too small to have their own schools, too sparsely populated to have significant representation. The other sticking point for me with LD1214 is that Alna families would be forced into the Wiscasset system. Again, student numbers are small enough to argue that statistics are moot, but look at the glaring trend. The majority, or 60% of the K-8 students who live in Alna are attending schools outside of the Wiscasset system. K-8 students or families are those who have the option of choice. There is a clear movement out of the Wiscasset system. Why force us back in? Why deny families these educational opportunities? Though my family is grandfathered in, I worry about the impact this would have on younger families who will be affected in a very profound way. Choice is working for us both as parents and taxpayers. Mr. Baston, a proponent for eliminating choice and requiring students to attend Wiscasset School, argues that there will be savings. As a taxpayer in Alna, I do not feel that the minimal savings proposed is worth disrupting what is a very good compromise. There is also a good argument that our property values will be affected in a negative way if families are denied the educational opportunities we now have. I strongly urge you to oppose this bill.
Thank you very much for your testimony today, Ms. Tilden, and hanging in there for the long haul. Any questions for Ms. Tilden? Representative Rankin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, what is the population of Alna?
I don't know.
700. I think it's
Sorry?
600.
7?
7 in the latest census.
Thank you.
650.
Representative Nelson, I do have those numbers that you were asking for, but you would have to excuse my recycled paper. Do I hand them over, or do we email them to you?
If you'd like, you can give them to the clerk, and we'll make copies for everybody's folder, if that's, or you can email them. Your choice.
Email will be less sloppy.
Okay, you can just, you can email
Am I
them to us.
excused?
Yes, I think you are excused. Everybody's got the idea how to do this. Next on our list is Meredith Fossil.
Senator Langley, Representative Richardson, and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is Meredith Fossil. I'm a citizen of Alna, and I'm opposed to LD1214. Sorry. I am particularly concerned about the validity of the survey that was sent by mail to all the citizens of Alna, which is the first exposure that I had to this issue at all, or most of the citizens. I worked as a professional program evaluator and policy researcher for over 20 years, and I have constructed many surveys. The survey that was sent to Alna was biased. It was worded in a way that is very similar to the way political push polls are usually worded. It is my understanding that the centers, and people said today, that based on the survey, I think it was 2-1, even 8-1, but 2-1 in Alna voted or said that they would like to pass this bill. However, the survey was extremely biased, so I would be very cautious about interpreting the results. I will go on and explain that a bit. I did not respond to the survey. I looked at it and I tried, and I realized that it was very biased. There was no way I could respond and say what I wanted to say. And even for those who responded, the survey was so biased as to render it useless. On your handout is the wording. This is the question, the one question that was asked, sent to Alna residents. Should Alna have the right to vote on continuing school choice for K-8 for new residents when that benefit costs all Alna taxpayers at least $26,000 in extra taxes each year right now? Your signature is optional. The results of this poll will be presented to the legislature. Return the postcard by March 9th. Voter 1, yes, no. Voter 2, yes, no. That's the entire survey. Problems that invalidate the survey. The survey consists of one leading yes-no question, negatively worded, convoluted, and biased. An easy-to-understand definition and examples of a leading question and a neutral question can be found on the reverse side of the handout that you have. I would search for something that put things in layman's terms, and so I think this was the best that I could find. It was designed for kids doing science projects. Okay, to even answer this survey, you had to accept the premise that school choice costs Alna a specific amount of money. If you wanted to retain school choice, you had to vote no, vote against voting for school choice. Pretty convoluted. There was no alternative to allow respondent to say whether they agreed with the premise or if they wanted school choice in Alna to be cost neutral. The cost figures in the letter and the survey, in the letter that accompanied the survey, which was a page, were presented as facts. And they are very likely not facts. Many of the citizens disagree with these particular numbers that were in the survey. There was no public discussion that might have served to test the accuracy of these numbers. So, I believe, myself, that the cost to Alna taxpayers that are in this letter and the survey are not accurate.
Ms. Fossil, if you could summarize for us.
Okay. The major point that other people haven't made, that this letter survey has already done damage to the public debate because basically it is like a push poll. Any person reading the mailing learned that the town has to pay extra for school choice, but that is not actually established through any kind of reasonable process, and those who use school choice might well be willing to help pay for any difference that did exist. But nothing of that kind of alternative was anywhere in any of the materials. So basically, and this information was widely disseminated, basically everyone in the town. So that sets the stage for the, quote, vote that this bill will then ask for. In other words, it's been pretty well biased already. And so if people are mistrustful of that, anyway, in sum, the survey is biased. It would not be approved by the Human Subjects Committee of any reputable research organization. And I therefore ask the committee in their consideration to discard the results because the survey is not valid. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Hang on, don't run away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. There's a question.
Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much. And obviously the issue of push polls is one that we're aware of. But my question is, I guess at this point, if this bill were revised, as has been talked about, so is only the citizens of Alna, only Westport, that would be voting, wouldn't that give a chance for all of your community to get better information and make a better choice?
As others have said, when I voted to join the RSU, I voted with the understanding that school choice went with it. And so I believe that that has been done. And I don't actually, I'm not really quite sure how this would be implemented, and I'm somewhat mistrustful given the way it came to us.
Well, I guess my question is, and certainly I can understand why you wouldn't want folks from Wiscasset voting on this and everything else, but although it's been voted on once, we vote fairly regularly and things do change and towns do change. Mm-hmm. So is there real harm in letting your citizens actually vote on it?
The harm possibly comes from the prejudicial information that is already out there.
But I'm saying it gives a time for all facts to come out and let everyone decide. And I guess I'm torn both ways on this, but we do vote, and as populations change, their determinations can change. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at, is if it's only your citizens voting, your town can make that decision.
They can. Again, I think that's a time-consuming, expensive process for something that's already been done. So, yes, they could, and I suspect that they would probably retain school choice. But at any rate, my major concern is that the survey itself does not present to you accurate information.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for your testimony. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. And last up to bat today, Patrick Sanborn, if you're still with us.
Good afternoon, Representative Richardson, Senator Langley, and esteemed members of the committee. I need to preface my remarks with the caveat that it was prepared to the original writing of LD1214. So please take that under advisement as you listen to me. I do greatly appreciate the opportunity to express myself before you today on this legislation and my opposition to it. A couple of years ago, an agreement was reached between the state and the majority of towns concerning school consolidation. Our school voted to participate based largely upon the desire to avoid the financial penalties that were threatened and the hope to reap some budget reductions as the consolidation was originally designed to achieve. One of the deciding factors in acceptance of the program by a significant block of voters that I am personally aware of in town was the protection of existing school choice that was explicitly included in the legislation. Unfortunately, since the formation of our RSU, the town has seen double-digit percentage increases in taxation based significantly in part on the education cost increase. The issue of school choice was not an accidental byproduct of an oversight in the original legislation. It was included to garner support and to make the changes brought on by consolidation as palatable as possible to certain concerned voters. The revision proposed by this legislation now makes it appear as little more than a bait-and-switch sales ploy. Such an action in a personal relationship would be considered somewhat deceitful. Between businesses, it could be considered a breach of contract. In this case, between the state and the townspeople, it does amount to somewhat of a breach of trust. It seems, and especially in politic action, at a time when the state government in general, and consolidation program in particular, can ill afford to break any sort of a trust with the public. The transfer of the final vote on the issue to the RSU level would in no way shift the culpability off of the state. Our RSU formed late and does consist of a grouping that was created simply to satisfy the parameters of the legislation. It is made of a geographically distant and historically disparate towns thrown together as leftovers after the surrounding towns grouped into other RSUs. There is little general knowledge of the detailed workings of Alna, Westport, and Wiscasset among some of the other communities. Should this legislation pass, we cannot expect this to fundamentally change. Into this void of knowledge will be thrown contradictory opinions on the merits of choice, and as you've heard today, some conflicting conclusions as to whether there would either be some savings or no savings based upon estimates and guesses that are filtered through a funding formula that I myself and few residents in town fully understand, and fewer still can explain. In the end, it will amount to little more than a poorly informed guess at the voting booth for those other towns. In the end, it's difficult to see any truly significant positive impact resulting from the legislation. What it would do is jeopardize a very functional and greatly appreciated institution in two small Maine towns.
Thank you, Mr. Sanborn.
You're welcome.
Any questions for Mr. Sanborn? President Lovejoy.
You mentioned your testimony was based on the initial bill. If it were modified to be only Alna and Westport voting, does it change your opinion?
That does create somewhat of internal conflict for myself because I'm a great believer in democracy as a pure and fundamental thing. I would really have to read it. It was explained verbally. It's all in fine print in the end. is what it comes down to.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. Seeing no one else raising their hands, we have conclude our public hearing on LD 1214, and we have one more bill to hear, and I'm going to have to turn this over to the House Chair, Representative Richardson, who's on the sponsor.